In Return of the Jedi, Luke asks Leia if she has any memories of her mother, to which Leia replies,
"Just a little bit."
But that what she has are really only images and feelings. Some say the events of Episode 3 changed or retconned what was established in Return of the Jedi with Leia and her mother. But is that really the right word? Did anything really change? Well, my friends, let's take a closer look. When Luke asks Leia if she has any memories of her mother, she makes the distinction that what she has are essentially just images and feelings, vague impressions she can feel or sense in her heart, not necessarily memories or understandings she can recall up in her mind. Luke implores her to continue, and she goes on to describe her birth mother as
very beautiful, kind, but sad.
So how does Leia have these images and feelings? Leia also says that her mother died when she was very young. So the dialogue makes it clear that Leia must have lived with her mother for at least her first few years, right? Well, not necessarily. The clever thing about this dialogue is that it is actually fairly ambiguous. Nothing specific is really nailed down. The beauty of the backstory lines in the original trilogy is in how they paint a broad picture. These lines serve as satisfactory placeholders for the story as it is at the moment, while at the same time also being ambiguous and undefined enough to remain open for further development and finer tuning and fleshing out later down the road for a time when the story comes into a clearer focus and Lucas decides for sure how he wants to refine everything. This is something Lucas would often do when not completely sure which direction he wanted to go with a certain thing. Without any other context, the line here in Return of the Jedi isn't as specific as it might seem. Still not sure? Well, let's get into it. Remember, Yoda talked about how through the Force, one can see visions and old friends long gone. Now, not only did Leia spend 9 months growing inside Padme, but as we see, even as a newborn, Leia seems to be generally quite perceptive of her surroundings, as opposed to Luke. And even later on Endor, she begins to realize that deep down she's known all along that Luke was her brother. But these images and feelings of kindness, beauty, and sadness, how does she have them? She wasn't old enough to understand any of that as a newborn baby. As we know, Force sensitives can sense the emotions of others through the Force.
I sense much fear in you. I feel the conflict within you. Let go of your hate.
So, what if these feeling impressions Leia holds are of her mother's inner states and qualities? As we see, her mother died holding on to the knowledge and hope that there was still good in their father, despite the tragedy of everything that occurred. That's compassion, inner beauty, and sorrow. Not that she would have a mental recollection of that moment, but all the same, I think we see Lucas making the effort to provide the opportunity for a general image to imprint onto Leia's mind that will stay with her subconsciously, combined with the feelings that imprinted on her through the Force. But Leia said her mother died when she was young, not when she was a baby. Again, that's arguably pretty open-ended. An additional explanation for that works for me is that to protect her from learning too much about her birth parents, whenever Leia asked how old she was when she was adopted, Bail and Breha answered only with, "When you were very young," keeping it vague but without lying or anything. You see, Leia doesn't remember exactly when her mother died, but she does have these remaining impressions from the short time they were together. So, these impressions that she has, she interprets them as impressions she gained while she was very young, and assumes they're more or less toddlerhood memories, not knowing that she has the Force, which is largely responsible for augmenting these images and feelings, and making them more vivid. And I ask, why can't Leia have the Force gift of retaining connections and impressions of people she has a strong connection with? If anything, I think it's a touching way to establish a deeper bond between Leia and her birth mother. And it gives them an even more meaningful connection. And how is this a stretch when, in The Empire Strikes Back, Leia sensed Luke calling to her? True, Lucas hadn't made them siblings yet at that point, but all the same, we can see that the Force can run strong between people who have bonded. We even have Dagobah seeming familiar to Luke, like something from a dream. And Yoda mentions that he's been watching Luke for many years. So perhaps through the connection of the Force, Luke was subconsciously picking up on Yoda's Force voyeurism. But like Leia, not knowing how the Force works, he mistook it for something more explainable.
Something out of a dream.
And no, these aren't exactly the same things, but they all help to paint the picture of how the Force can work between people. So, is this a retcon? Was Lucas ignoring what Leia said about her mother? Did Lucas not realize some fans had filled in their own details from the hints that were given? Yes, of course he did. He may have also originally had similar ideas back in the day. But ultimately, the finer details evolved into something that helped the story come together and work on a more interesting and dramatic level overall as a whole. And the word retcon has a bit of a bad rap. But if something comes into clearer focus, it's not always a bad thing. Just like Vader becoming Luke's father, the biggest retcon in the whole saga, new ideas can make the story deeper. And no story maker should be held to something vague just because it came first. And Padmé's death? I'll be making a video on that soon. All in all, I'd say what we see transpire in Episode 3 still jives with what Leia says in Return of the Jedi. The bond between Leia and Padme is enhanced, and nothing substantial has changed. Combining Force sensitivity and actual proximity nicely solidifies this mother-daughter relationship and gives Leia and Padme a more meaningful connection, all in that Star Warsy way. So, I say, whatever impression you got from Leia's line in Return of the Jedi, I don't think there's a big enough incongruence or disconnect between it and Episode 3 to take anyone out of the movie, especially when, in my opinion, those lines are not contradicted by the prequel trilogy. They only sound less detailed. So, since these relatively nebulous lines in Return of the Jedi don't really nail down anything definite, there's not really much there for Lucas to even adhere to. And again, I think it was done this way intentionally, for the very reason being that he hadn't yet figured out exactly how he wanted the backstory for the parents to go. And now, when looking at the saga as a whole, this can ultimately be chalked up to more impactful story crafting. I don't know, it never bothered me. I didn't cement myself into any particular headcanon. I remained open to whatever Lucas thought was best. What's important is that the underlying themes such as humanity and compassion are still there. So enjoy the big picture and the underlying themes that run through the saga with the same impact and with that Lucas touch.
The new girl who plays my mother, Queen Armadillo, or whatever her name is.
Thanks for watching and share your thoughts.